To continue developing our program, we want to invite the representative of the Indigenous communities in Canada, Seth Leffert. Seth was participating in the previous side event within the framework of the 48th session of the Human Rights Council. He is originally from Canada, from Mohawk. He has led various encounters and manifestations on behalf of the Indigenous peoples in the North American country. Undoubtedly, Seth is one of those important social leaders that represent the Indigenous peoples that is leading the battles that they are still fighting in Canada. So we would like to give him the warmest of welcomes. Seth, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I would like to offer my softest and kindest words of gratitude and thanking all of you for making this side event happen, and to begin to talk about the kind of genocide that Indigenous people in Canada and the United States and Australia have faced. And I'm hopeful that this leads towards charges of genocide against all three of these countries, and that we seek to find solutions. So I understand that today's discussion is to be focused around the data and the kinds of what happened here in these places. So I'll speak to that a little bit, but it's a painful topic for me. Oftentimes we talk about these sort of issues as if they happened in the past. Canada is particular, likes to pretend that it's a human rights advocate, and it's a defender of good, but it's in fact not the case. I think the most important thing to focus on or to think about as we begin to have a discussion about genocide, and particularly what's occurred in Canada, we have to ask the question, why? Why did Canada seek to eradicate several hundred Indigenous nations across the Americas or across Canada? It's common to refer to Indigenous nations as tribes because in international law, in the past, tribes didn't have as much power or as much rights as nations do. But I implore you to consider the fact that when the Crown and when England and when France and Germany and Denmark came to the shores of North America, they made treaties with nations, not with like roving bands of people running around in the bushes, but established nations with established borders and established lands, with political systems and economic systems and education systems and so on, with unique and powerful militaries and economies and culture. And so what we're talking about is the eradication of that. And the question is, why? Why did Canada choose to do that? Why did the United States try to choose to do that? And the reason is very simple. Because they wanted the land and they wanted access to the resources so that they could take those resources and sell them throughout the world or transform them into a product that could be sold. So Canada's primary economy is built off of the extraction of resources that are sold throughout the world. They sell iron ore, they sell gold, they sell diamonds, oil, timber, fish, salt, all sorts of things. All of these natural resources are resources of Indigenous people, of their territory and their lands. And because the European countries that came here made treaty relationships, treaties are agreements that are made between nations. They're not made between a nation and its citizens. You don't make treaties like that. So what's happening in Canada is that Canada has been actively working at trying to force assimilation. I heard some interesting things in the last few months or month or so with what's happening with Yugoslavia and Russia and the sanctions that the United States and Canada put on Russia and that sort of thing. And I thought to myself, that's very interesting because that's exactly what they did to us. They sanctioned us in every single way. We're literally the most sanctioned people in the world because we're not even allowed to have relationships and build relationships and do it and trade with other nations in the world. We're not even allowed to trade with other nations, other indigenous nations in other countries, like in the United States, where we've had a relationship for thousands of years. They block our ability to do that. In fact, sanctioned so much so that Canada doesn't recognize our brothers and sisters of our own nations, because many of us, like my people, the Mohawks, we call ourselves the Kanenhariyo, the people of the land of the flint. And we were the first people one of the first people to experience the onslaught of genocide from the American government after the American Revolution. We actually were actively participated in the American Revolution as when the United States split away from Britain. They tried to take our land first, my people's land first, in New York State. And so we joined in the battle to protect our lands. And United States and Britain made a treaty. And our friend here who was just speaking about international law, it's one of the basis of international law is these original treaties. And they made an agreement and they passed a border. They drew a borderline between Canada and the US that never existed before. And they did that in the 1700s. And it left us out. And so we've been struggling since the 1700s with many of our people living on one side of that border and many of our people living on the other side of that border, not even being able to do trade and to freely work with ourselves. In fact, one of our communities has the border running right through the center of it, and the people have to check in every day to go home and then check in with the border patrol to go to work or check in, they go to groceries. They're constantly being harassed and asked questions about where they're going and who they are and all those sort of things. This is the sort of experience that we've had. When Canada was first formed as a country, they needed land because they didn't have hardly any land. It didn't really exist because the majority of the land was Indigenous lands, and it was recognized and understood as our own countries, our own borders, and we governed ourselves. We weren't like nomadic tribes of people roaming around lost. We had complex and complicated agreements between ourselves about how we manage our territories. And so Canada, what they did was they created something called the Indian Lands Act, and they rounded us up and they put us in these little pockets, little reserves. And then they offered us the opportunity to give up our rights as Indigenous people and join them. And majority of us didn't do that. And so what they did then was they took over our schools. Many of our nations, my people, and the nations around us, we had already established our own schooling system. We had the first public schools in Canada. And so what they did was they created what they call the residential schools or the Indian day schools. And many people don't talk about the Indian day schools. They're very similar. One school, the kids were taken away and forced to go to those schools. And the other school, the kids were still forced to go to the school, but they went home at nighttime. That was the difference. And so they started with these, actually they started with what they call the manual labor schools. And my first wife, her community had the first manual labor school. They literally made schools where they would teach, forest Indian kids, Indigenous kids, to learn how to do manual labor, so that they would be the work. They could use them as a workforce for Canadian society. And their plan initially was that we would be basically the slaves and the workers, the slugging rocks and moving bricks and so on for them. Well, that didn't work, and so they they actively began to work at trying to eradicate our language and our cultures so that they could erase our memory of who we are and erase our relationship to our lands, because they wanted our lands for the resources. And that is continuing today. So during the Geneva Convention on Human Rights, all of you are welcome to look this up. Canada refused to sign the Human Rights Convention, on the basis that there was one of the criteria in that list that was considered genocide was cultural genocide, and Canada refused to sign the declaration until cultural genocide was removed from the list. And the reason was because they were fully aware at that time in the early 1900s that they were in full-scale cultural genocide, eradicating our languages and our way of life and our way of thinking so they could take us from the land and force assimilate us. And that forced assimilation is a part of the reason why we have so many sanctions against us, that we're not able to have economic relations outside of, we're not allowed to have economic relations outside of them. The British Crown ordered in 1763, the Royal Proclamation, and they said that this all North America was for their use only, and no other European or other nations could come here and have a relationship or do business or do anything here. That the King of England was the one completely in power, and that is why everything is related to the crown. The crown. Even the United States was that way until they had their revolution, and I believe that Australia is the same. And so what happened was we have been in a perpetual state of being sanctioned to not be able to have any relationships outside of the Americas. We're very privileged and very lucky that I actually personally got to speak with the ambassador of Venezuela. There was an ambassador of Venezuela to Canada, and he came and met with my people, and it was a historic moment. It was beautiful, and we got to become friends, and we miss him. He came a few times and we visited. But that was one of the very few times that opportunity has occurred for us, and Canadian government wasn't happy that happened. And so we've been held in this state of poverty. The first prime minister made a policy that, and it can be looked up easily, that that it was of his mind to starve us. So they rounded us up and they put us in open air concentration camps called Indian reserves. I'm currently in one right now. And they still exist. They're still fully happening and functional. And they rounded us up and they put us on those. And then they cleared the land, and then they just poured the settlers on the land, and they opened up the gates and said, brought people from Ireland and from England and Scotland and Germany and Denmark and France and everywhere, and filled our lands and our country with people that they basically gave our land away to, on the condition that they would pay taxes to the crown. Because all of our treaties, we are not obligated or responsible to pay any taxes to the crown, because we're not a part of the crown, we're separate. And so they wanted to get rid of us so they could do that. And so that's what's been going on. All of the things in the movie that you've seen, it was very good. I'm very thankful that the Chinese government or whoever built that, put that together, because it's very, very good in terms of what transpired. The same things happened in Canada: forced assimilation, the theft of our children. So in Canada, they made it legally requirement that all of our kids go to their schools. And that still is the case. I was looking it up on the internet a little while ago, and it was saying the residential schools, the forced going to their schools that ended in 1947. Well, that's not true. The last residential schools closed in 1996, and the last Indian day schools, there actually are a couple still functioning. They're still running today. There's one in the community where I live, and it's ran by the federal government of Canada. And it's an Indian day school. That's what I went to, was Indian day school. And the purpose was to eradicate our language. So they make these, they wrote in their constitution in 1985, that section that they said they enshrined our Aboriginal rights, our inherent rights, that they can't be taken away from or destroyed or gotten rid of. But then they never just defined what they were. And so they arrest us and drag us away and do all kinds of horrible things to us. And then when we try to defend ourselves and say, well, we have the right to do that, they say, well, prove it. And then they force us to go, excuse me, into their court system, drag us into their court system, even though we're a separate people, force us into their court system. And then they generally beat us by attrition because we're too poor to fight the extreme costs. And the Canadian government will go to go no ends, like they won't stop to win their case. They'll steal our land and then we'll take them to court and they'll drag it out for 30 years. That happens in Canada. And this is the sort of thing that occurs all the time. I'm currently have charges against me that I'm carrying for several years now, and expect further, where they're claiming that I disrupted their access to their property when it's our land. So these are the sort of things that we're experiencing. So many of you are, I'm sure, curious to know about the residential school unmarked graves. So imagine anywhere else in the world, there are graveyards in the schoolyards. Let that sink in. And they did not mark them graves. They didn't even tell the parents their children died. They killed the children is what they did. Because the objective of those schools was not to educate, but to eradicate our life, our way of life, and our way of thinking, and our languages, so that they could force our assimilation, which is it's an act of genocide. And they eradicate our languages on purposeful, because our knowledge about our land is in there. And so when the children that wouldn't break, that they couldn't force to speak English, that resisted them when they took away their names and gave them new ones, because that all happened. When they forced them to be someone else than who they were, they died. They killed them. Or they created scenarios where, and they even had reports, Canada had reports, there was reports written to them by doctors who went and investigated the schools and were like, there's poor ventilation, they're not getting enough nutrition, they're into too small of buildings, and the cause is it's spreading tuberculosis and other diseases, and it's killing these kids. And the government did nothing. In fact, they kept it going and put more money into building more of the same kind of thing. They didn't fix it. It was on purpose. It was on purpose. They purposely tried to kill us all so they could take our land, take our resources, and sell it to places like China. That's what they're doing. And that's continuing today. And even when they're forced and faced with the fact that they don't own the land, that they don't have a treaty in a particular area, and so they don't have any right to go there to do anything, their constitution says so, they'll just simply go in with militarized police instead of the army, because if they do militarized police, the rest of the international world ignores it, or maybe is not able to intervene, and then they just increase the scale of violence until the Indigenous population is too afraid to fight back, because they know that they'll result in our murder, and there's so few of us left. They just threaten us with murder by they bring in weapons and assault rifles and sniper teams and gas and all these sort of things. And we're not able to resist them because we know the consequences. In the past, when we resisted them with firearms, they brought the army or they killed us. Dudley George was a man. He was resisting. They were trying to protect their land, and the Ontario Provincial Police killed him. These are the sort of experiences that we have. This is what we're living with today. I live in this community, and I want to build a house, a home, but I can't get a loan to get a house because we can't get banking. They have blocked us from being able to have banks. Some of my people have went to seek to set up banks, like building relationships with other places in the world, because Canada won't allow us to have our own banking system, and they block us from being able to borrow any money to business development or housing development and those sort of things in our own communities on these little concentration camps. And they completely block us and refuse to recognize our right to our land off of the reservation, because we have huge tracts of land that are ours, originally ours, and that we have treaties for, and that it's our land, and they're piled full of settlers.
Seth, disculpa. No quisiera interrumpir.
Seth, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt your extraordinary intervention, but we also have other panelists that need to take the floor. So we ask you if you can have a minute to wrap up your ideas. Thank you very much, and we apologize for cutting you off.
No problem. I'm not sure. It's such a huge issue to talk about, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a bit. And I would like the opportunity to speak more. It's what we need to look at our solutions. We need the opportunity to be able to leave Canada and the United States and be independent. And I would encourage you other countries to consider how you could help us, financial aid, military support, these sort of things, because we're literally in fighting for our lives. So thank you very much, and I hope that there's fruit coming of this. Have a great day. I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.